Hi, this is Bryan Caplan, and I'm here today with my former co-author, Zach Weinersmith. Together, we wrote my first nonfiction graphic novel, which is Open Borders, The Science and Ethics of Immigration. Since then, he's been leaping from success to success. Hard to keep track of him. But in any case, he has found time in his busy schedule to talk to me about my new graphic novel, and hopefully he won't be too jealous of my new co-author.
No, I was just looking through your book a minute ago, and the amount of windows they had to draw. I have that part I'm not jealous of. I'm jealous of the completed, gorgeous graphic novel, not the windows though. That would have I could feel the hand cramps.
Right. And just for anyone on Earth who doesn't know Zach is, of course, the creator of Saturday morning breakfast cereal. What I would tell people who don't know who Zach is look, you've seen his cartoons, even if you don't know who he is. There's a certain
Yes.
style. I remember actually being in a bookstore and saying, wait, Zach drew that cover. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. And then I like, it's Zach, actually. So in this book, really, for both books, I am the main idea person, but you were fantastic on the word side too, because you gave me a bunch of the best jokes in the book. And
Oh, good.
also just in terms of the visuals, you did so much with these really pretty sparse storyboards that I sent. So like, that's just to start. All right, so we did this book on immigration. The new book is Build Baby Build, The Science and Ethics of Housing Regulation. So obviously there's a lot of overlap, right?
Yes.
Right, because if you can't build anything new, then where are the immigrants supposed to live? That's what it really does come down to.
Yeah, I'd be interested to ask your opinion on that. So there's a lot of discussion these days about. I think perhaps you have been as disappointed as I am that it seems like people are turning against immigration left and right now in a way that wasn't true when we were making
Mhm.
our book. And one of the interesting quirks for more econ nerdy people is like my sense is it's gotten equally bad in Canada, which is considered to be sort of
Hmm.
more liberal on these issues. Except, I mean, they're obviously still taking a lot of people, but the worm seems to be turning. And part of the problem is
Mhm.
they're not building housing, and there's this conception that
Mhm.
it's raising the price of housing. So I don't know. What's your reaction to
Yeah, good question, buddy. So, I
that?
mean, so first thing, so on the US, actually, I'll say that I am pleasantly surprised by what's happened in immigration policy since COVID, because it
Hmm.
went down to almost nothing during COVID. And that's like, oh, God. I
Yes.
thought this was going to be bad, but you go and look, so Trump got it down a little bit, but it was only in 2020 that it suddenly actually started to look anything like what he had been promising. But then
Yes.
actually, it seems like it's gotten back to normal, maybe even a bit higher than you would expect. I am also controversially pro illegal immigration, which means I am pro not doing a good job on safeguarding or securing the border. And I think that Biden has done a surprisingly good job on that too. So
Well
um,
said. So you don't feel there's a crisis.
I'm sort of pleasantly surprised by this as to whether
Uh,
it's a plan or it's. I mean, usually whenever this is going on, I figure it's it's not really the case the people at the top actually want to let in a lot of immigrants. It's just a question of how dirty or bloody are they willing to make their hands in order to stop it. You know,
right.
I have always said, look, the East Germany shows you can totally seal your border. It's just you
Yeah.
need to use East German techniques to do it successfully. And the question
Yeah.
is, are you that evil?
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Are you evil enough to shoot people across? Then you can seal your border with near 100% success.
That's yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now,
That's true.
in the case of Canada, I think you're right that it's, I've talked to Canadians, a big issue there is specifically immigration is driving up housing prices. And honestly, given your other stuff, that probably isn't wrong because especially if you are letting in high skilled immigrants, they're not going to be construction workers, first of all. They're going
Hmm.
to be doing other things. They've got high incomes, so they're going to want to get nice, sizable, pleasant places to live. And on the other hand, if you're strangling housing supply, then yeah, that you expect that that's just going to push prices higher, especially again in the most desirable areas, which is where your high tech immigrants are most likely to be going. So
Yeah.
there again, um, it's also, of course, true that anytime someone has a baby, anytime someone moves from rural Canada into a more desirable place, then once again, it's the same basic problem. It's just that when an immigrant does it, people feel like then, or now there's a green light to complain about it and to target it.
Right.
That's the thing that's got to stop. That's something that shouldn't have happened in the first place. But again, if you would just go and allow builders to go and build stuff, that would be so much less of a problem. Or again, really, if you're letting in construction workers as well as home buyers, then it can easily even go the other way. But it
Right.
doesn't really do you that much good to let in a bunch of construction workers if no one can get the permits to build anything.
Right. Yeah. 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 And that's something I wondered about, and I don't have it in front of me. I can't remember if you addressed this, but something I wonder
Mhm.
about sometimes is why there's not more city creation. Because it
Yeah.
seems like there'd be a vast opportunity, but maybe there's something I don't understand about urban planning.
Yeah, so probably the usual economist story is just that there's a big coordination problem. How do you get everybody to all move to your new city?
Hmm. Hmm.
So normally the way that it works in the real world is that in order for a small town to grow really rapidly, there's got to be something amazing that can only happen there. Like you're in North Dakota and you find oil, and it's like, all right, well, you can't go and drill North Dakota oil in New York City, so you're going to have to come here and move here, and we're going to pay the premium to get people to do it. And then once it starts to can feed on itself, this is the usual historical story of cities that you
Hmm.
start at a port, you start at a place with a natural resource. There's got to be some strong independent reason that people are there. Now, once they're there, then they may stay there forever because, well, I'm here because people are here. But how do you solve that chicken and egg problem? There's got to be something really great about going there. And probably
Right.
almost the only reason there's any population in Alaska is precisely they got these really valuable natural resources such that you can pay people a giant premium to just go work there half the year and it's worth their while.
Right. So
Right
let's
now,
switch to.
so not
Oh, go
not in
ahead.
the book actually, but there's another piece where I said that if we were to do some really serious privatization of government land, then you could have a big enough parcel where, say, Elon Musk could go and say, "This is going to be the new Muskville, and I'm going to be the big draw. I'm going to go and move my factory here. I'm going to make this a new hub. I'm going to live here personally. I will be the belle of every ball. You can go and look at me and touch my hand and feel inspired by my
Oh God,
existence." Right.
that's going to be an interesting selection effect is going to
Yes.
happen.
Yeah, anyway, so which reminds me, so a few years ago, you went and bought this ranch outside of Charlottesville. Hope I'm not giving away your location,
No, no.
right? And
Yeah,
you do have a plan. At least I remember your plan was to go and get other people to go and live on your land. How's that worked out for you?
pretty well. The only other people are my brother's family, so it's
Well,
still
that's pretty
pretty.
awesome to go and
It,
get your brother to move his whole family, and you just build
it's
another house there.
it's so the best thing of all is we live like about a half mile from each other as you have to walk. So we're still on the same property technically, but it's a good walk. And our daughters walk between the houses,
Oh,
which is
that's
nice
great.
because like you have that modern parenting thing where you're like, I want them to have freedom, but I am still in a state of terror. But this is like
Mhm.
fake freedom, so they're so they're like walking through the woods on their own, but there's nothing dangerous, and so they get that kind of like a small amount of independence and exercise.
And the local
But yeah, I
government
actually.
doesn't,
Oh, go ahead.
or say
Go
the
ahead.
local government does not care how many houses you put on your land, right?
No, no, it does deeply. No, no.
Oh,
Actually, I
really?
suppose we.
So, I mean,
Yeah,
like, how
no,
many
no.
acres do you have again?
I shouldn't say. I don't want to sound ostentatious because
But,
what's
but it's
that?
a lot. It's more than 5 acres, right?
It might, far more. Yeah, too many. I mean, it's not. It's not. I think part of it we bought at the bottom of the market, and part of it's that it's not
Mhm.
good ag land. So it's like
Right. And then, so
beautiful,
what is the
but
local government's position on you building more houses on your land?
so I would say, well, I mean, so first of all, there is no local government. There is, I mean, I'm in a whatever Virginia calls it, like a census designated place or whatever.
Mhm.
There's no like mayor. But
Mhm.
no, it's actually what's interesting is so we, it was our two families, and we thought for a hot minute after we had got the mortgage that maybe they wouldn't be able to build a house. And the
Mhm.
restriction, and the other thing is they wanted to have a trailer on the house on the property, but they
Mhm.
couldn't. And the rule was, this is the amazing part, the rule was, what is a house? A house has at least one hot plate. So you could live as long as you didn't have a hot plate. You could have a very large house, to my understanding, as long as you had no kitchen. Um,
Mhm.
and so actually it was a whole rigmarole, which was shocked because I, like an idiot, I thought you
Mhm.
buy land and then you can like burn
Mhm.
radioactive waste on it. It's your land. But
So no,
turns
no one
out
minded what you did, right? Or were there any houses on your land at first? So you built one house, or what happened?
so we got my family, we got the farmhouse. My brother,
Ah,
they built a house. So but yeah, actually, so I wanted to get back to you. You said something interesting, which was that the U.S. could open up parcels of land because obviously the U.S. holds a lot of wilderness. My instant reaction to that is part of why we have that wilderness is that even till the 1930s, the U.S. government was trying to offload the land and nobody wanted it because it was like crappy. Like all the good stuff. Like the reason there's an Oregon Trail is because you wanted to bypass the crappy middle of the country. And so, of course, it's possible that's changed. We're not an agrarian society anymore, so maybe like land per se is more valuable than it once was. But I don't know. What's your reaction to that?
So if you take a look at the map of the US and where the federal and state governments own land, basically it's almost totally predicted by the rise of the conservation movement.
Right.
So all of the area that was incorporated in the US prior to conservation is almost all privately owned. And that includes some of the crappiest land in the entire country. So if you go to West
Right.
Texas, yeah, you're from Texas, right?
Yes.
So
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so you drive through West Texas and you're like, who would want to be here at all? They got some
Right.
oil drilling, maybe a little bit of farming or ranching or something, but still it's all privately owned. Maybe it's just they're thinking one day someone is going to want to build, the population will get high enough, someone will want to live here. Yeah, it doesn't seem to me like it really is a big problem with selling land. Of course, if you set the price too high, then it's going to be a pretty different story.
Well, yeah, right. So classically, the U.S. gives it away for almost nothing
Mhm.
to settlers, and but that was a big thing we got into for this Facebook because it was like people think if you up the amount of land, it will end war, which is like absurd for 18 reasons, but like also just like this was a thing the U.S. did for a long time, and actually. I wonder about with the city thing, like if part of what's going on is just like there are actually like a limited set of places that'd be good to put a town, but I don't know.
Hmm. All right. Now, thinking a bit
Um,
about the production side,
yes.
so most people assume that you were going to be the artist on this. And actually, I don't know how you feel about this, but some people thought you were after looking at it.
I shouldn't comment on that. I thought it was good art, but of course, there
Yep.
are places I'm sure I made different choices. But
Right. Now, probably some
yeah.
of it is an illusion because I use the same color palette for both books.
I think that can contribute to it. And then we also, I see he went with the we decided to make you kind of like jouncy and boyish looking instead of
Mhm.
professorial. So that was part of it too. Um, but yeah, let's talk about the production side. I'm interested in. I mean, this. So as I was flipping through this book, and there's a part of me that's like, oh, I regret not doing this because I'm so interested in housing policy. But on the other hand, like obviously this is a book that calls for a huge amount of wide shots of buildings,
Mhm.
which is just very painstaking work as an artist. I mean, there's tricks you can do now with like modern brush
Mhm.
techniques and like AI stuff, but I'm sure that was like that must have been tough. I was just seeing like how long some of those pages must have taken to produce.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I mean, it was the kind of thing where I think my artist was working on other things simultaneously. So I never got a really good sense about how much was
Mm-hmm.
competing projects and how much was the particular page took a long time. The so thinking about some of the main things that I noticed when working on this, so you were also working on other projects
Yeah.
simultaneously. This is one where it took a while to go and get this and get the groove down. And there's actually an early period when he got a pile of drafts done in a month, and then I felt like, all right, this is going to be a breeze, and then and then things slowed down a lot afterwards. So that was a little bit frustrating, but I was just glad that the book was finally completed, and I thought just in the end looks really good.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I had a question. I should have written it down. Oh crud. One thing I wanted to ask is, and maybe this is getting too far back into policy, but one thing that really interested me about this book is when I first saw what the subject was, it surprised me a little bit because obviously, like, if you're doing like the Bryan Caplan set of economics and liberties themed, moderately controversial books, like I would have guessed something like drug policy. But when I got into the book, I'm like into the world of economists who are pro YIMBY stuff. But I was surprised by the numbers, like how like massive
Mhm.
the bad effects of housing restriction are. So I can see
Mhm.
why it was that like why this was such a tempting topic.
Yeah, I mean that's why I wanted to do the book because honestly, like I read academic research, I find effects that are surprisingly big and seem really solid, and then I say, well, the numbers aren't going to change anybody's mind, unfortunately. How are we going to do it? By the power of comics. We will use comics to change people's minds, but especially just to make people appreciate what's at stake. I don't know if you remember the panel where I've got the bear debating the mouse. Remember that
Mm-hmm.
panel? Right. And it's the one
Yes.
where I also have some blackboards there and I say, think fast. A trillion minus a billion approximately equals what? Yeah, it's a trillion. Right? This is really hard to get across to people, especially in a debate. So yeah, that page is heavily inspired by a number of frustrating debates that I've done, mostly on immigration, where I say, look, I've got trillions of dollars of gains. And the other one said, but what about have the ATM machines and having to press two for English? What about that? It's like you can just concede everything you're saying, but those are tiny problems by comparison. Like, yeah, but I got a lot of tiny problems. Like add them all up, that's still not very much.
Yeah.
But if you're just
I
trying to win over an audience, a bunch of tiny complaints are highly effective.
Yeah, especially when they're vivid
Mhm.
and you feel them each day. Yeah, I wonder if it was interesting for you because like with open borders, obviously that's a very much a minority position. I mean, I know there are lots of pro-immigration people, but
Mhm.
very few people. It's something like 5%, I would guess, or like
Yeah.
actually in favor of the position you and I take. Whereas like, I don't know if you had numbers on this, but like the sort of, if you want to call it YIMBY,
Mhm.
deregulate housing, that seems much more popular to me. That's just an impression, though. Has that been your
Mhm.
impression?
Well, let's see. Here's what I would say. The big difference between immigration and housing is there are almost no prominent national figures who are there saying crush housing. We got to get, it really is much more of a local thing. And even when it is local, there's not a big ideology in the sense of we want to make sure that no one builds anything in this entire country. It is very
Right.
much like, I just don't want it happening here. And often it really is the level, I don't want it to happen within sight of me. It's not even, I don't want it to happen 10 miles away. It's like 10 miles away. I never see it. So what do I care about it? Whereas for immigration,
Right.
there are multiple national organizations that are vehement about the horrors of letting in migrants. So that is one big difference is what you're up against, where like in one case, there is almost, it's hard to go and find who is the national voice of NIMBY. And it's like, yeah, it's like,
Right.
I don't know who it would even be. It's kind of hard to explain. Like who the people themselves would not say, well, look, I'm not against other places going and building stuff. I don't want it here. Probably the closest thing to a national view, if you talked about privatizing federal land, then I think you would get environmentalist groups saying, no, this has to be
Yes.
preserved exactly as it is. But once the land is already approved for human habitation, then I don't think it's a big national issue. But for immigration, it totally is. Now, but if it gets to the question of support, then I think
Yeah.
that the two policies are similarly forlorn and lacking
Right.
in popular appeal. I'm trying to do something about it. I mean, here's a good way of thinking about it. There was a really cool paper where they actually just tried eliciting, all right, what do you think would happen if we let housing supply grow by 10% in a particular city or maybe in your city? And about two-thirds of people just denied prices would go down at all.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty much one third said prices would go up, one third says they say the same, one third says it goes down. So the central benefit of the policy is denied by two-thirds of the population.
Wait, so a third said it would go up? Like there's more
Yeah,
housing.
third say it will go up. And it's along the lines of, well, there's just going to be luxury homes anyway, only for rich people. And it's like, well, but here's the thing is like, even if that's totally true, those rich people are going to leave some other homes that exist. And so those will be freed up for other people. And if you say those are rich people too, fine. The chain reaction is a little longer, but it still winds up
Right.
meaning that there's fewer, same number of people are competing for a larger number of properties. In the book, you might remember the page where I've got reverse musical chairs.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
like we're adding chairs instead of removing chairs. And the key idea is that suppose that some of the chairs are a lot nicer than other chairs. Well, in that case, the faster runners either way will get the best chairs. But still, if you add enough chairs, then there's going to be some lower quality chair available for the slower player. And you can think about your money equals fast and poverty
Yeah.
equals slow in order for the analogy to work. So I still think that it's fine. But step one is just like two-thirds of people are just in total denial and basically saying that the standard econ one thing that more housing will lower prices to them, that's just an ideology. I mean, that's just your
Right.
dogma. And like I keep saying, look, if you're running a lemonade stand and you cut price to go and sell more lemonade, is that a philosophy? It's common
Right.
sense and it's science and every child knows it. So to think that it's totally different for housing is really just a weird thing, but it does seem
Yeah,
to be
it's
true.
strange too. My impression is like, there are a lot of issues where someone will say, well, the Econ 101 explanation isn't quite on, but with housing, I don't know anyone
Yeah.
who would say like you have 20% more houses and they're going to be more. I wonder if some of this
Yeah.
stuff is like, sometimes you meet people who like think corporations like pollute because they take sort of a joy in pollution,
Yeah.
rather than that they want to make money.
Mhm.
And it's a similar, like, well, they'll build expensive housing because that's what they do.
Yeah.
But they're,
Right. I mean, I think a lot of the model for people is you're very naive economists because you think if you're nice to developers, they'll be grateful and then they'll make the prices low. It's like that's
right,
not the story at all. The story
right,
is that if you let them build a lot of stuff, they will have to cut the price to actually get the customers they need. In the same way as someone running a lemonade stand and you made 10 vats of lemonade, like how am I going to unload this stuff? Well, you better
right.
cut the price, kid, because you're not going to sell 10 gallons of lemonade at $2 a cup.
I'm interested. So I think probably a lot of people who disagree would say something like, well, why not just have the government put $1 trillion into public housing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Yeah,
honestly, a big part of my answer there is, public housing is one of the least dumb government solutions around because at least it addresses the problem of lack of housing. I mean,
right,
often $1 trillion will just mean government gives $1 trillion to people to buy housing, and it's like, well, you haven't done anything to solve the supply problem. It just means now there's more dollars competing for the same heavily restricted supply of housing. Yeah, if the
right.
government were actually to spend $1 trillion building public housing, I was like, well, at least this is the kind of thing that could work. And that's one where I just say there's the practical problems of public housing. First one is a lot of evidence that it costs a lot more per square foot because the people that are building it are not trying to go and produce at a lower cost. Then there's the problem of low quality per dollar and poor maintenance. And then, the last one is just scalability. So right now in the US, under 1% of people live in public housing. So the idea this is some realistic solution, well, let's just multiply it by a factor of 50. It's like, didn't do
Right.
well at the low scale. I mean, really the only
Yeah.
pro public
Oh, go ahead.
housing thing I've heard just comes from what works in Singapore. It's like, well, should you base your prediction of how well it will work on the most successful country for your policy? Or should you base it on the country it's in?
Yeah, I just feel like generally mentioning Singapore is a dangerous move because you're talking about a really unique
Mhm.
situation, policy wise.
Yes, any of what they're
So
doing isn't
yeah,
isn't really what we call public housing. Rather, the government builds it and they sell it to you in a 99-year lease. So the occupant really is, for all practical purposes, the owner with all of those good incentives of an owner to maintain the home.
right, right, right. That's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't known about the specific way it works. So one thing you had mentioned that I'm interested in is like this is something that came up a lot with immigration, although it might be changing for the worse right now. I'm not sure, which is if you ask a lot of people, what's your view on immigration, more or less same, you'll get one view. But then if you ask them, well, how salient is it? Like, where is it
Mm.
on your list of issues? It's like eight, except for I think on right wing people, it's like one or two sometimes. But like for people who are generally pro immigration, it's often low salience. And
Yes, yes.
that's
Low
my
salience.
that's my impression of the problem with this housing stuff is it's ultra low salience because it's like nerdy stuff. So even if people are kind of on
Mhm.
your side, it's like econ dork stuff, and maybe that's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, there is the YIMBY movement. So I would say that
Yeah.
the people that are most in favor, it's got a high salience. And the advantage is that it's almost entirely the pro people who are thinking big of we want to make this a national movement. We want to go and build a lot more housing in an entire country or an entire planet. And on the other hand, the opponents are quite insular. It's more
Yeah.
of I'm just trying to stop it here. Now, it's important to remember, like I keep telling people in the book, it's not just homeowners that are against building stuff, it's tenants too. And the best predictor, again, is do I have to look at it? If I have to look at it, then you can't do it. And if I don't have to
Yeah.
look at it, then I don't care, which is pretty striking for an economist because once you know economics, you realize, well, gee, building 5,000 units a mile away could be a lot worse for your housing price than building one unit across the street.
Right.
And yet it's the unit across the street that seems to really actually bug people. But
Real.
to get back to
Yeah. Yeah.
sorry, but to get back to that production process. So one thing that you and Ady have in common is you're the two people who have ever had to endure my strange system where I first go and storyboard it using software from 2006, which is my company is so
Yeah.
bankrupt that you can't even register the software anymore.
You
They
should
don't
buy
even have
it.
anything set up to take your money when you try to register it. They're completely shut down. So you can have a completely legitimate copy of the software. You can register it, pay the fee, and there's just no one left to take your money. But now I have had artists where I've shown this to, and they just look at me like I have two heads and they say, like, I can't work with this. Like, you have to write a
Really.
script. Yes, I've even artists who are kind of angry. They're like, "You expect me to degrade myself with this piece of garbage that you're giving
Uh,
me?"
Really, like it's too
Yeah,
controlling, or it's just weird that it's from 2006, or huh?
so like it's really strangely it's at perfectly the level for a non-artist. I was
Right,
trying to
right, right,
use more
right.
recent stuff, but it had so many options. It was so complicated, so flexible that I'm like, "Look, I need to learn a lot more art in order to use the software." Whereas this, it's really just drag and drop. I get a picture from Google, put it
Yeah,
in there. I can change the zoom. I can move it around a little bit, change the angle a bit. And then, as you probably remember, I just put a little note saying like Z colon, make the
right.
smile bigger or whatever, or insert me here, or add another person, or make it look
Yeah.
evil, whatever.
So for people who don't know who might be listening to this, like the usual way it works if you have a writer illustrator team on comics is that the writer will produce something that looks maybe kind of like a movie script, only
Yep.
it might have like visual notes. It might, and people vary in how specific they are. So
Yes.
it can be like, but usually it'll at least be like, here's what happens in panel one, and it might say wide angle, Spider-Man swings through the sky, and then panel two, close up on Spider-Man's face as he grimaces, that kind of thing.
Yep. Or Alan
Um,
Moore will do 10 pages a panel, supposedly.
Is that
You've
right?
heard, yeah,
Uh,
you haven't heard this story? So I've heard Alan
no,
Moore does 10 pages for a panel sometimes.
10 pages of like.
Script, 10 pages of words. I don't know if it's double spaced or not, but like it shows, right? Like whatever
It's
he's
yeah,
doing,
that, that
it's
that's
awesome what
surprising,
his
but
visuals look like.
yeah, no, he's completely. I can't argue with success. That's fine. I mean, it's funny how like that is like surprising but not shocking that Alan Moore does that.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, so it's funny you mentioned that because I have a so the comic book I have out called Beowulf, which is like a kid's
Mhm.
Beowulf, which I think I talked about at Caplan like 4 years ago, or whenever it
Four,
was.
4 years ago was COVID, but yeah, so it'd be 5 years
Oh, you're
ago.
right.
Five
You're
years
right.
ago.
Gosh,
Yep.
time is something. Yeah. So I had a completely alternate approach, but it's a weird book. It's basically it's almost not a graphic novel. It's hard to categorize. It's like a poem with visuals.
Mhm.
Which we actually it was a whole discussion like where does this even get shelved? Um, but what I actually gave him, I literally just gave him like a column of words, like a script in the sense of like these are the words that have to go on each page, and then beyond that, I think I had less than a dozen notes, most of which were things like "This is who's talking right now," um,
Really? So
and
you didn't say what background should be used or angles or anything?
no. So
Wow.
I and this is
You're the opposite of a control freak, Zach.
well, it's
That would have
complicated,
paid.
right?
That would have hurt me so much to let the artist do it.
I know. Well, but you see, but you were good about that. I thought because my view is, in the relationship, when you come down to it, the writer's the one who's kind of the animating force. The illustrator is trying to realize the vision of the writer. But if you strangle the artist too much, they stop being creative. So
Mhm.
I always felt like you gave me enough leeway to be like, I think
Mhm.
you should change the layout, and I think so that was good though because I mean so I'm almost with someone like Gilles Boulet, the artist. So like I am so like I'm a reasonably good illustrator, but he's like to me like as like impossibly good. And so my view I probably overdid it. I actually think he at some point felt like I wasn't giving him enough
Mhm.
information, but I just was like so like enamored of like some of the stuff he does that I wanted to kind of like
Mhm.
let him do stuff, and he did, and there's a kind of like a sort of melody to the book. Like I mean, he has skills that I just feel I lack. The sort of visual melody to the book that would have been hard to tell him how to do. Maybe if I did Alan Moore and I had 10 pages per panel, that
Mhm.
I could have hit that. But yeah, I know that's one of the pieces of advice I try to give people. Like I think you were very good about this, which is like if you're working with an illustrator, you can always like bludgeon them into adjusting every pixel to your desires. But if you are open to them saying stuff, because when you're drawing, opportunities sort of appear on the page, or disappear. Things that sounded good in the scripting phase don't look good, and then you have to be open to kind of having a little creativity when it gets to that point.
Where I got a lot of my inspiration for the production side is I was watching the movie American Splendor, which is this
Oh,
fantastic
interesting.
story of Harvey Picar. And at least in the movie, I don't know if this is even true in real life, but in the movie, he's comics fan, and then he just gets this idea, well, I really want to go and do one of my own, except I can't draw. So he actually just takes out a sheet of blank paper and he makes some panels in it, and then he does some stick figures, and then he hands it over to Robert Crumb. And then Robert Crumb says, oh, I'd love to illustrate this. So that's
Yes.
basically what I was able to do with this software combined with Google Images, is I do a mock-up. I mean, but
Right.
honestly, like I like, doing it my way, I have a lot of trouble really understanding how people that do it the normal way do it, because I was finding, so I mean, I set up the panels and I do it and like, oh yeah, I can't really do this. There's too many words on this page and it's just not going to fit. And to see
Mhm.
that on a script seems so hard, when even when you're doing it as a visual, often it takes a while to actually look at what you're doing and say, oh yeah, I better pull back from here. In the software that I
Yeah.
have, it gives you lots of different panel arrangements options. Not enough, but enough that you can at least start, and then you can sort of modify it by hand if you want to go and do little insert panels or things like that. But to me, it would just be very hard to go and write it the traditional way. Whereas doing it as storyboards, first of all, not only do you like, did I feel a lot more comfortable that I've got something where it's got a good flow and a good design, but also just to take a look at it and say, okay, this is going to look good. This is going to be something that people will actually want to watch, and then this is
Yeah.
something that can be illustrated. Whereas, otherwise, well, it's just like, it's hard to imagine how they do it.
Well, there's actually a lot of variation. So I know, for example, some cartoonists, what they'll do is they'll actually like thumbnail a page, like literally it'll
Mhm.
be like a 2 by 3 inch layout, and they'll do what you're talking about. In terms of
Hmm.
like knowing how much text, I feel like that's something that
You
just
said
you
so
do it
that's
long
writers
enough.
will do it or artists will do it.
Well, among cartoonists, there's a lot of people who do both.
Mhm.
That's what I mean. Yeah. So people who are doing like a solo project. I mean, it's inherently different when you're working with someone because the back and forth is more complicated for good and bad. But I think in terms of like the dialogue stuff, a lot of what goes on, at least for me, I mean, you do this long enough, and I think eventually you just get a kind of intuitive sense for what you can get away with. But that I think it probably took me 10 years.
Now, when I
um,
was writing this book, a lot of what I was thinking is I've gone to the Zach Weinersmith School of Art. I perhaps in fact certainly I'm not your best student, but you did teach me so much. Like just the lessons of what can you do in a long shot, what can you do in a close up, what the right
yeah.
balance between words and pictures is. The number of times you told me we need to split these pages because I was having these very crowded page designs, and you made me realize this. And so this time around, I didn't have you to guide me, but rather I was the one that was guiding other people. So I was going and trying to help the artists with it. And by the way, Zach, another awesome thing about you is that we did the contract for Open Borders to be 160 pages, and then you just said, no, these pages are too tight. Let's go and have a ton more pages that I'll do for free.
Yes. Well,
So that.
it's well, yeah. So for me, like, I don't know how you feel about this stuff. When I make a book, I like I view it as a thing in my life that is a potential source of shame once it's out. So I'm very like it needs to be as much. I need to at least be able to look at it after it's done. Um, it's interesting you mentioned about the splitting pages. And yeah, I remember doing that because it was. The thing is, there's this weird thing in writing where I think often something will feel like it's boring that you've written, and people will say, "Well, shorten it so it's less boring." But often it would be better if you lengthened it. It would go faster because it's like it has to be longer to do its job. You know what I mean? Like if you pick up a comic page and it's dense text with like little faces peeking around the sides, you're like, "Oh God." But if you read the same amount of text spread over 3 pages, it's fine. And so it's not about the text. It's something else, and it's a little. I was also noticing I was this build baby build is a little different because one of the things I pushed on was I wanted more close-ups in our book, and the reason I felt that way is because like it's good to have wide shots for like setting scenes, and I do think a lot of the really nice pages in that book are ones where you have like a wide shot. But for me, like what can be really good is if you have a wide dramatic shot and then you come in tight because you only really get the expressiveness when you come in tight. Even a mid shot is kind of just little strokes, but if, like um, and so like some of the pages I remember, I think there's a couple we had where it was like there's a landscape and there's like an inset or you are kind of overlaid on it and it's a full body and it's close enough to see your face, with some expressiveness, and then you can really feel it. And so I was glad to see there was some of that in this book. Like obviously this book demanded more wide shots because like it's all about construction. Um, but nice to see. I felt like maybe I had a little influence there of making sure the sort of emotional valence was very present.
I mean, you might remember that Scott McCloud talks about the idea of in any comic book, every panel is an emotional average over all the things that are happening and all the words that are being said. So
Right,
if you have a big paragraph and it's all spoken at once, then just by definition, the actual images are the same. And so the person might
right,
be changing their tone throughout the entire paragraph. It could be Brutus and Julius Caesar starting off really calm and then moving up to a giant rousing crescendo, right? So
right,
anyway, um, that's when you go and you split it into more panels, then you can go and actually change the emotions of each panel, which makes it a
right.
lot easier to say, okay, well, the real point of this is that we're going from happy to sad, or we're going from sad to happy, or we're going from feeling like we understand what's going on to being confused. And if you put too many words in one, then it's like, well, do I do the average of happy and confused? That doesn't
Right.
really go for what I'm trying to do.
Did Did you notice one of my favorite things is it's very hard to write a book. Everybody who has ever written a book knows how hard it is. And but one of my favorite things is that once you're on a topic, you start reading differently. So like basically because you're stealing, right? You're like, oh, how did they do that good thing, you know? And like whereas if you're just
Mhm.
reading for pleasure, you're just kind of enjoying yourself. But if you like, oh, I need
Mhm.
to figure out the method they used to create that effect, then you start seeing things you would probably have never noticed. Did you go back and reread like I don't know, like Alan Moore or Tintin or
Hmm. Let's see. I mean, the main thing that I reread before I'm working on a new project, I reread Scott McCloud actually.
sure, yeah.
So, reread Understanding Comics, reread Making Comics. Those are the ones where it combines the actual explicit lectures on what you should be doing when you are using this format, along with just so many great examples of techniques that you can use. So, So probably this book is I use a lot of what Scott McCloud calls the masking effect from manga, where you have an
Yeah.
ultra detailed background and then you have cartoonish characters. And you might think it wouldn't work, but it works really well, actually. Somehow it feel like the character gives you the relatability, but the background gives you the virtuosity.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever read Mizuki. He wrote like a biography of Hitler in comic form, and he wrote a book. He wrote a wonderful book called I think it was called Onward Toward Our Noble Deaths, and it was like
Oh
a
yeah.
comic. Yeah, you know that one. Oh,
Oh
I
yeah,
mean
of
that's
course.
I think of him as the so for people that don't know, this is a guy who was actually in World War II on the Japanese
And
side, and
lost his
he
arm,
wrote.
right?
Is that right?
Yeah, he's the guy
I'm
who,
blanking on that
I think
detail.
he's the guy who lost his arm too.
But what I love about it though is it's not it's neither a kind of like we were all fools nor is it this was great. It's just like a very realistic
Mhm.
like there's a scene where like he it talks about like the sort of brutal honor culture that they had, but at one point like he's missing his shoes and his like boss who had like beaten him up and this other stuff gave him his shoes. It was just this very kind of beautiful story. But one of the things he did to be very like the distinctive feature of Mizuki is the backgrounds are extraordinarily lush. My understanding is he would project like photos like of the jungles of those islands and just draw over them straight up. And but then he would do these very sort of classic Japanese style, very simplified, almost cute characters. And there's some sort of interesting emotional valence to that because it's like projecting like how you actually felt is on the way the face is drawn, but then the background is real, and so it makes it legitimately sort of frightening that they're in this jungle. It's like a real place.
Hmm.
Anyway, sorry, I love this book. Um,
All right.
but yeah,
Yep. So, and then did you read his, let's see, what's it called again? It's the it's the 3 volume history of the reign of Emperor Hirohito.
no, I've wanted to. I actually
Yeah, but,
have had it on my
yeah, but
desk
it is
for
the same guy.
years.
So what's it called
The
again?
Showa or whatever.
Showa. Yeah, Showa, of course.
Yeah.
Showa, which unrelated to the Holocaust.
Yes.
Totally
Yes.
different
Yes.
Showa.
Different Showa, different word. Yes.
Yes.
I know I haven't. It's literally sitting on my shelf, and I've been so busy I haven't got it, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Although, I mean, honestly, for me, the greatest of all manga is Barefoot Gen. 10 volumes of nearly autobiographical of the kid who loses his whole family from the Hiroshima bombings and then
Yeah.
grows up to become one of the most famous artists in Japan. Have you read those?
No, my manga knowledge is woefully lacking. Have to
Yeah,
add
I
it to
mean,
my
so
stack.
like I read them to my kids, which did have the strange effect of they started spouting extreme pro-Japanese imperial propaganda when they were learning about World War II, and they're like, look, there is another side to World War II, but
Yes.
it's like their side is not does not have all the answers. Let me show you.
Yeah.
There's
Fascism is not.
something there's
Yeah,
something misleading about it, and yet it's also true. Yeah, like these totally innocent children got nuked, and like that's the way it
yeah,
really was. And
yeah.
when
No,
I was
no,
in when I was
nightmares.
in Hiroshima a year ago last December, I'm like, wow, like
Oh wow.
that book happened here. It's pretty wild to think about it.
It's almost. I don't know if you've read Hershey's book on the survivors of
No, I
the
don't think
Hiroshima
so.
bombing.
It's good.
It's like the yeah. I think he was. It's been years, but I believe he was there like shortly after and was like photographing. And it's just like, if I had to pick a way to die, radiation poisoning would be the very last thing I would pick. And so it's
Hmm.
just
All right,
astonishing.
let's
But
talk a little bit about the nonfiction graphic novel format. First of all, a
yeah,
lot of people just want to resist the name, and they say, "Look, it doesn't make any sense." And like, well, like whether it makes sense or not, that's the standard thing in use. And I often do say, "Well, look, Truman Capote called In Cold Blood a nonfiction novel." Like
that's
he
right.
really
That's
did,
right. He
and
did.
like, and you can understand why he did it. Like, well, it's nonfiction, but it has literary merits, and I'm doing something
Yes.
that isn't just this isn't just reporting. I'm trying to go and tell it as a story. So the idea of there being a nonfiction novel isn't so crazy, and then
Yeah.
the idea of the nonfiction graphic novel, it's a documentary comic book, is another way of putting it. So I think that that is a reasonable description of it.
Did you
But
get?
so
Oh, go
sorry.
ahead. You go
Uh,
ahead.
oh, so I remember, so when Open Borders came out, you might remember this. Matt Iglesias did a thing where he said, yeah, really, there's no reason to do anything other than nonfiction graphic novels on policy questions because no one reads or absorbs anything more
Yes.
sophisticated than what you can put into this format anyway. Why don't we just go and have a duel of comic books for policy, and that'll just settle it, and we won't bother with any of this with anything more pretentious anymore.
Yeah. No. The way I view it. I was talking to a friend of mine about this, which is a nonfiction graphic novel is essentially
Did you
the
say no? Yeah,
opportunity.
nonfiction, right? Thought you said not for a second.
Yes,
I thought you
not
said
nonfiction.
non-Christian. I'm like
Non-Christian.
well, that's
I
an
don't believe
interesting
in
idea too.
non-Christian.
But
Next book. No, is that you get basically like a 2 to 3 hour lecture where the audience is actually listening,
Mhm.
and you're going to give it exactly once, right? It would be like someone tells you you get to give one lecture one time, but everyone will have their eyes wide open and will absorb every word. That's what a graphic novel is, and I do believe what Iglesias said is exactly correct. Like I actually this is like a whole thing I think about sometimes. I read a lot of nonfiction. I enjoy it, but I wonder if you were to quiz me after every nonfiction book I read,
Mhm.
like could I generate more than about 3 pages that was
Mhm.
not opinions? And I'm not sure I could, which suggests we're doing too much.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
one
for
one
me,
thing
often
I was
it's the
oh
stuff
yeah,
that I
go ahead.
read when I was young. I do have a command of the material.
Right.
The history that I learned before I was 25, often I have it all in a mental map, and it's all chronological slash
Mm-hmm.
geographical, and I can tell you what's happening at each time in each place. But after the age of 25, I found it very hard to ever get to anything remotely close to that. So, like I can give you a quick history of World War One or World War Two, or even like a long history of World War One or World War Two pretty easily. But if you ask me to go and tell you about the Taiping Rebellion, like I've read
Right.
books on it, but it's like, there was that guy with that thing,
Yeah. Right.
and like they took some cities, and there was stuff, and
And it
Europeans
was very
happened.
sad. Yeah, yeah, totally. And but I learned some of that. One of the things I like about having a career as a writer is there are subjects I really do have that depth of knowledge about because I had to write a book. And
Mhm.
once you have to write a book, you have to get your facts straight because like you're going to feel shame when someone tells you you're wrong, and so you get the appropriate level of anxiety. Um, one
So
thing I
if I
wanted to
get the
ask you
gist
about.
of a city on
Oh,
Mars,
go ahead.
we're not going there for a while. Is that correct?
That is the main takeaway. It's funny about
Mhm.
that book. Just as an aside, I thought you'd appreciate it. I repeatedly got people saying the premise was paradoxical because we had said that it was unfeasible and stupid anyway, which I feel like it's not. There's all sorts of activities you can do that are both unfeasible and would be stupid if you succeeded. Um, but yeah. I mean, that's so. Yeah, if you ask me basically anything about space settlement, I have still got that encyclopedic knowledge that it is beginning to fade as I give fewer interviews.
And by the way, an
But I
extremely brave book to write because I would figure that the kind of person who would read a book about the colonization of Mars is a person who is desperate to believe it's going to happen pretty soon.
Yeah, that was. I actually had a conversation with a fairly prominent friend, a pop science writer, who's a friend of mine, and when I told him that, like the conclusion of the book is you don't get the thing probably. Uh, he was like aghast. He was like trying to figure out how he could put a happy ending on it, and it was not on purpose. But yeah, I thank you for saying that because I've had a lot of people be like, you were being overly defensive about these people who are going to be mad. And I was like, no, they are really, there's a non-trivial number of engineers who this is like an article of faith that all these things will happen, many of which are like, I've talked to a person who told me that this doesn't surprise me at all now, a fairly prominent space advocate doesn't believe supply and demand will work in space. It'll just be free of
In
supply and demand. In
space.
space,
Supply and
exactly.
demand
Yeah.
in space. What is that from the Muppets? Or what is that from?
It was yes, yeah, that's pigs in space. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yes, that's wow, that's deep in there somewhere. But yeah, I want to ask you. So one thing, getting back to graphic novels that are nonfiction, like one thing that I remember from our book is I kept being treated in some circles as if we had invented the format, um,
That's always
because it's
nice.
like that's very gratifying. I'm like, no, this is almost as old as this is actually. I would say basically as old as graphic novels. I mean, like the civil rights movement had comic books about Martin Luther King. Like it's a fairly
Mhm,
old. I mean, it's more popular in like Europe and very popular
mhm,
in Japan. But it is a
mhm,
thing. But I was happy to take credit
mhm.
where I could. Did you have that?
Let's see. I mean, I have had students who actually take things that I tell them and then start calling it the Caplan theory. Like I teach, like in PhD Micro, I've taught search theory, and a student started calling it the Caplan theory and saying it changed his dating life. And I'm like, okay, well, that's wonderful for you, but also this came around 10 years before I was born, so I don't think I can really
Yeah.
take it for it.
So someone actually used like the secretary problem algorithm
It was
to.
more along the lines of if you are trying to get a lot of dates, would you be better off would you be better off going and trying to improve yourself a lot, or would you be better off just asking a lot more women? And he realized, yeah, asking more women is way better than trying to improve myself.
That's terrible news. I didn't know that.
No, I mean, it seemed to work wonders for him. He did both, but he realized the main issue was, I can either raise P, the probability of success, or N, the number that I ask, and N's way more within my power than P. So I'm just going to go and max out
Oh
N.
gosh.
Right. And
I feel like
for
I
me,
wonder
whenever I
when
talk
you.
about nonfiction graphic novels, I always go back to Larry Gonick. My memory is that you had not read
Oh
Gonick
yeah.
when we did our book. Is that correct?
I want to say I was familiar with it, but I hadn't. So after you mentioned it, I bought all of it, or all of
Mm.
the classic parts of it. Yeah.
Right. So, that's for me, that's sort of the holy grail of quality because it's just so
Yeah.
well done. I mean,
So
honestly,
well done.
until the last book when current events overtake it, and then you can tell he's just got a normal axe to grind. But
Yeah. Well, that's what you get to do when
it's
you're
the
at the
usual thing
emeritus
for all
level.
historians. Like, as long as they're doing ancient Samaria, you can't tell what news channel they're watching. But once it
That's
gets
right.
to 10 years ago, then it's like, yeah, like you don't have any special knowledge about this. You're just going and repeating what you heard on TV.
Yeah, I think of that as the distinctive feature of an emeritus professor writing a book is there'll be like a 4-page digression about something that was in the New York Times yesterday in the middle of like a book on calculus or something, you know?
Right. Now, you did have this question about how ambivalent do you feel about the level of depth that you can put into a nonfiction graphic novel?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, sorry.
Yes.
So to elaborate, so yeah, I mean, so I have this pop science book out called A City on Mars, and actually it's
Mhm.
30% shorter than the draft I shouldn't say wanted to do, but initial draft, which had a
Mhm.
lot more depth on a couple features. And I did feel a sort of twinge of anguish when like big piles of
Mhm.
research just had to be cut.
Kill your
And
darlings, Zach.
they are well, I didn't murder them. I saved them for publication elsewhere mostly,
Ah.
but but yeah, which of course you have to do, right? Yeah. So we wanted to do this whole thing about how like the comparing space to the U.S. West is stupid, and but our editor was literally like, you can't at 90% of the way through a spacebook be like, let me tell you about 1882. Um, it's just no good. And so it was a smart move to cut it, but I do
Mhm.
feel like so with that book, it was really crammed with info, and I would feel anguish over any part being lost. But inevitably, with a comic book, like I said, like I think a full length book, like your last full length book was Kate Skin's Education, was
Yes,
like a
that's
full
right.
length. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that I would guess is like a 10-hour read, say, assuming you don't stop,
Yeah,
like you're just
probably
straight
more,
straight reading.
honestly. Yeah.
Maybe more. So let's say like 10 to 15 hours, whereas a graphic novel is like 2 hours. So inevitably, like there's some loss of nuance that has to happen. So I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Ultimately, I sleep totally fine because I've got the endnotes. The endnotes are where I clear my conscience. That's where I say
Yeah.
anyone that is curious about the exact sense in which what I'm saying is true can read it. And then you can say, okay, that's the sense in which what you're saying is true.
Yeah.
There's a general philosophy of language question where you driving through the countryside, you talk to a farmer and you say, all right, so how far is the general storage? Oh, it's a mile all further along the road. It's like, how far off from a mile does it have to be before you call the farmer a liar? Like,
Right.
well,
Right. Right. Right.
1.01 miles, he's not a liar. All right, 2 miles, I think he is a liar. But there is a
Yeah.
range of in ordinary language within which the people are the listener is supposed to understand that the language itself has enough flexibility that it's not a point estimate where you have to be right. You just have to be in a ballpark. And then when you go and reference the literature, that's where you actually are getting at least closer to a point estimate. Although even there, you can say inflation's 1.29%, but is it 1.290000 forever? It's like, I
Right.
guess it might be, but we'll never know because no one even measures it that precisely.
Yes. Do you ever? But are you ever in the position of like there's something that's really like you'd like to put in, but you there's it's like a crossroads. You either put it in and go all in, or you have to leave it out.
The closest thing I came to that is that after the book was almost ready for publication, there was a very intellectually serious critique of one of the main papers I was relying on. And then I'm like, oh,
Oh.
gee, what do I do? Like,
Yeah.
I don't have the we've already gone to press excuse. It's like we're going to press in a month, but I can't really, at reasonable expense, rewrite the whole thing. And then finally, the compromise that I struck was I kept all the artwork and I just added a warning sign, which is a physical sign drawn into the panel saying, warning, this paper has come under serious attack. Read the end note if you're curious. And that
Yeah.
basically, I felt like an end note wouldn't be enough because the main text would then be pretty misleading or at least questionable. But at the same time, I didn't want to redraw it. So I said, like, big end note with all the information. Plus, there's a sign which is very clearly directing every reader who would have the slightest interest in the research to go and read the end notes. And then I felt like, all right, I can sleep again easily at this point.
That's interesting. Did you have anything like that with Open Borders? Like, was there anything?
Hmm.
I know you've talked about wanting to have done an environmental section.
Right. So the main thing there is it turned out that there was one serious arithmetic mistake in the book that was pointed out by, let's see, blanking on his name for the moment. Anyway, I was one where he said that I had just totally misunderstood what the particular table of numbers was, and I then went and emailed the original authors of the study and they confirmed that the critic was correct. And then I did a blog post. Okay, so I misread what this was saying. I think it was a forgivable error because you had to read a footnote pretty carefully to understand why my interpretation of the numbers was wrong. But it did substantively mean that I was being overly optimistic about what the National Academy of Sciences said about the expected net fiscal impact of high school dropouts. So
But
yeah,
not in
so
a
if
way
I
that.
was redoing it, I would redo that part. This point, you know, like I just did the best that I could, which is say, all right, I was wrong, I made a mistake, I misinterpreted this. It was honest, and I'm not going to go and just pretend like it didn't happen because and like hope that people don't like the guy because they disagree with him. So that seems pretty sleazy to me. Yeah. So yeah, the two things that I wish that I had done for immigration book would be a chapter that had environmental effects of immigration and then also contagious disease. Contagious disease, it's totally understandable why I didn't do it at the time because no one was talking about it. But on the other hand, for the environment, there is the serious question of, well, wait a second. We know that people in rich countries have this bigger environmental footprint than people in poor countries. So isn't there this big environmental harm if you allow people to move from poor countries to rich countries? And then I've got a story that I think is so cool, and the visuals would be awesome for it. So if you to start letting your artist imagination run wild with this, which is that there's something called the environmental Kuznets curve that says that the way that at least modern pollutants work is they start off real low when you're really poor because you don't have modern technology. And then they start rising very rapidly as you industrialize, but then they peak when you were at middle income. That's important. Environmental harm peaks at middle income and then starts going down again. Now, in all of economic history, we have never once observed a country go from being poor to being rich without being middle in between. However, immigration really is a teleportation technology for moving someone straight from the Stone Age into the information technology age, skipping the regular industrial age entirely. And that's the dirtiest age measured by modern pollutants. There's also this other issue, which is, well, wait a second, you're not measuring horse manure, are you? Because that's stuff that you get rid of with modern technology. So we need to always remember that, as well as just pure cooking fire and things like that, which is also really bad at pollutants. But
Right.
even by the standard, by the pollutants that people are focused on, it really is a big gain to move them straight from poor to rich and skip middle, unless you're just hoping to trap people in poverty for eternity, which is what would be required to prevent those countries from ever moving through that middle stage.
Yeah, yeah. I always thought that was like separate from what the right policy is. That seemed to me like the obvious, like, because if you say we can't let them in for environmental reasons, you're just saying kind of like, well, I'm going to continue being as polluting as I like, but you people
Mm-hmm.
can't, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember I was thinking that I was reading Hannah Ritchie has a book out, and she was talking about like how probably people like me, as opposed to like people who live in New York, are actually more polluting because like I feel like I have a very natural lifestyle because I have like a garden and I have chickens and they have eggs, but actually I have to drive a lot farther whenever I do anything. So I'm probably actually much worse than like a guy who lives in New York and takes the subway and has like a 200 square foot apartment.
Yep. And never
Even
mind
if
the
like,
effective altruism point of view could go and take all the effort you're putting into those chickens and eggs, write
right.
an extra book, and then sell it, and then give the money to the poor or whatever else, right?
Yes, yes, yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a
But
rabbit
those
hole
eggs
you could
taste
really.
really good, right?
I don't think I can tell the difference. I'm just here for charm. I know I'm like the weirdest. I mean, I remember I was arguing with someone about this like deeply. I was like, no, I don't think you can tell the difference on a blind test, and they're like, absolutely, you could. I just don't believe it. I mean, someone's yelling at their computer right now, but I just I mean, it's nice to have them coming to my house from a little building next to my house, and the chickens amuse children. But the idea that I could have a cake and tell that it was Walmart eggs versus these, I doubt it.
Because I
Um,
can totally tell the difference between a fresh out of the oven homemade cupcake and a store bought cupcake. That's a
I
very
agree.
that's an extreme contrast, actually. Like the store bought cupcake, it's really good, and then you go homemade one. Like my son made some, and I just stood there for 5 minutes, smelling like this is so good. I don't even want
Yeah,
to eat it. It's so wonderful. But
I think there's some chemistry going on there. Yeah, like the worst homemade bread is better than anything at the store, and I don't know why. There's I don't know, something about bread preservation. Actually, to not get too far out of field, the one question I wanted to mention, there was, I don't know if you saw, there was a cool paper out of UT, a guy named Kevin Couric who had a paper who said, so he's one of these people arguing that we should try to avoid the incoming massive depopulation of the planet
mhm,
in 100
mhm.
years or so. And he was arguing that he had a model that basically said, actually, once you're on the other side of the Kuznets curve, you'd rather have a larger population because then the cleanup is much easier for a large economy to handle than a smaller one. Which I thought was like kind of obvious once you hear it, but like an interesting point.
I mean, I guess if you're thinking the large population cleans up the mess of the previous population, then that
Right,
totally makes
exactly.
sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
If
That's the
it's
assumption
the
that.
large
Go ahead.
population's better at cleaning up its own mess, that's a little harder to understand, but it could be. All right.
Well,
So last question. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Let's do the last question, which is, yeah, is AI doing your next
Yes.
illustration
Right. Well, I
gig?
mean, really, let me start by asking you. So, how worried are you about AI making you obsolete, Zach Weinersmith?
Oh gosh, I am almost hesitant to answer because like almost anything I say will offend someone because I am in both circles. I have like dear friends at like Nvidia and OpenAI, and of course in the arts. And so there's like a normative question and there's a like
Mhm.
practical question, right? So the normative question to be asked is, what do we want? Part of how we design IP law is to make sure there's like creativity. Although I guess I don't know. Do you want to do away with IP law? What's your stance on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. The
Yeah.
stuff the stuff you can replicate with a contract, I think, is fine. But definitely, I became a lot more anti-patent just based upon a single diagram that Alex Tabarrok showed me. It's just the diagram of all the main Silicon Valley companies and all the lawsuits that they're doing against each other.
Uh huh. Uh
And it's
huh.
just a spider web of litigation. It's like, this is your plan for encouraging innovation. And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
like I guess that's a dumb plan when you put it that way. People are
Yeah.
like,
So
I mean, I'm
yeah.
fond of there's a common textbook view that there's a few industries where patent protection is essential, like pharmaceuticals, because there's an
Yeah.
enormous fixed cost and there's very little marginal cost. And on top of it, it's just not that common that that there'd be two competing claims that are hard to adjudicate as to who actually stole the idea from who. So that's where it looks best. And then for like software patents seems like it's really out of control.
Yeah, patenting tiny obvious things, and yeah, okay. But so from the perspective of like artists, we say essentially like you write a book, that's your book for a very, very, very long time,
Mhm.
and in theory, that's to encourage you to do the labor of writing a book and making it really good and all that. And so what's interesting, so I'm talking about the practical side right now, is I was actually talking to an editor at a comic book house, and just over dinner I said, what if someone came to you with a completely AI illustrated graphic novel? What would you do? And it was immediate no. And he said the
Mhm.
reason was, one, we don't know if there's any liability issues because
Mhm.
like we don't, the law's just not worked out. So suppose
Mhm.
it's almost certain, like, so I know I was on a list. My art was scraped for AI. It was a
Mhm.
dubious honor.
Right.
My
I
art
mean,
was
you
worth
don't really
scraping.
know if your artist stole his work either, so that's a dumb argument.
Right, right. Yeah. Right. But at least it's not worked out yet. So it's an
Mhm.
open legal
Yeah.
question. And then also that the fear was that it would cause such a backlash. So I don't know if you
Mhm.
saw Clip Studio, which is what I use for our book. It's one of the standard pieces of software. They tried to use generative AI features, beyond the ones they already have, but that's a separate issue.
Mhm.
They like sort of directly, obviously generative features like press a button and an owl appears type of stuff. And there
Mhm.
was so much anger among their core community of artists that they just killed it. They removed it.
Wow.
So I think you among artists you cannot underestimate the level of. I thought it would be fear, but it's much more anger. I
Mhm.
think there's a kind of like justice feeling, which justice doesn't make sense to me as a reason not to do something like this. I'm more concerned with like having an ecosystem where like good art still gets made. Um,
Mhm.
but I don't know. I don't know. It's not like I think of sometimes like when I was
I
10.
don't. What do you think of
Sorry, yeah.
sometimes, Zach?
Yeah, what did I say?
Yes.
Well, so I think let me tell you. It's funny. My daughter does that too. Like tease up a statement with a question you're supposed to respond to. And um, when I was 10, if you came to me when I was 10 and said, "Little Zach, when you are 40, there will be a machine," and you say, "Machine, draw me a comic with the following things," and it will just do it. The idea that any part of me would have said this is negative in any way was absurd, right? Like you just be like, well, obviously this is the dream. And of course, eventually it'll happen with movies that you don't need a 100-person team of highly paid people to do a movie.
Mhm.
And so I know I'm rambling a lot. I'm trying to tee up a lot, but I guess for
Mhm.
me, my feeling is it seems likely to me, just as a practical matter, that I don't see why I couldn't be replaced wholesale in maybe say 10 years.
Mhm.
um, and how I feel about that is not great, obviously, from a like job standpoint. Although presumably, like at that point, the world is quite different. Um, I don't know if
You
I've
may think
answered your
so. I mean, like
question.
the
Yeah,
usual view among people that I know who are optimistic is your charisma will save you, Zach.
but
No
that
AI will have the Zach Weinersmith charisma, and people are reading your stuff not merely because of the
yes,
self-contained product, but because they think of it as part of their connection with you. And then this sounds hard to believe, and yet you look at all the people subscribing on Substacks and things. It's like
yeah.
often they don't get any actual private gain from it. It's just I like this person, I like what they're doing, I want to connect with them, I want to feel like I'm giving something back to them, I'm grateful, and the way that I show my gratitude is by going and giving them $8 a month.
Yeah, that's true. And I have two thoughts on that. One of which is my experience is that is a relatively small subset of people.
Mhm.
Although it depends
Although
on who you
enough to
count,
give a
right?
lot of people a great life.
100%, 100%. And I would say, there's also levels. Like Patreon supporters are just they're saints. They literally give money for nothing, or money for sustaining, but not for any kind of direct transaction.
Mhm.
And then there are people who like always buy your book. That's pretty close. Like I actually one of the most gratifying things I had with like the last two books is I had people be like, I just bought this book because it's Zach, but actually to my surprise, it was a really good book. And I was like, well, thank you for both of these things.
Well, thank you
but
for
but
your
but,
candor.
but yes, but to the downside of what you're describing, like I know you said that was the optimistic view. What scares me, and this is getting into old man territory, but like I was talking to someone about how I should like optimize my Instagram account, which is already a thing like I'm not happy about having to do. Like I'd rather just draw things, but fine. This, when you're an entertainer, you go where the people are shelling out. And so I was learning how to optimize my Instagram account. One thing she said was like, "Hey, I heard you have chickens. You should post chickens because people will feel they have a parasocial relationship with you." And I was like, for me, this is like horrific. This is like, no, this is some kind of
What if you drew the
dystopian.
chickens? Could you draw the chickens? Would that feel better?
No, well, I
Put the
guess for me
chickens
on
into a
the.
cartoon.
I'm not
I
saying
think
it
there could
wouldn't
be a lot of
work.
demand for a chicken book, Zach.
Oh my God,
Yes,
no! So
Zach
like
Wiener chicks.
yeah. So here's my problem. Here's my problem is I want everyone to be like WB Yeats. I want that like artists should be Yeats. They should be thinking only about their art and maybe kind of miserable, but that's all right. But most of what they're doing is composing and craft. And I just worry if you move to a world where the main reason you get paid is that people like you or not, like as a human, that sounds good because it's like a human, but it's actually potentially negative because you're like, I like you because you're sort of doing a performance of like interesting person. Like I would much rather have people hate me but have to buy my art because it's so unbelievably good than like me. And and but I feel I am that is a kind of voice from the past now. I think I feel like maybe you could tell me like I feel like that's a thing like that you can see Gen X believing. I don't think millennials believe something like that generally. It's much more like sort of political and personal. And I think Gen Z's all in on Instagrammy stuff and like personal branding. But I want this sort of voice from the past that's just no, I'm just an artist and nothing else, and I will do nothing else for you. But the problem is that man might stop paying. Um, so I don't know. That's what scares me.
I mean, one of Robin Hanson's funnier claims is that no one should be picky about the kinds of compliments or appreciation they get because so many people get none. So if you're at the level where you're like, I have to get the right kind of appreciation, it's like, all right, I'm just done listening to you. Like, you're so fortunate in the broad scheme of things. Who
you
cares?
know, I have a
So
friend and I.
and
Oh, go
like
ahead.
this has actually changed my life a bit. Yeah, like I'll just take whatever I can get. So, like thanks. Yeah, like I like the way you use the color brown. Like well, that's wonderful. Like it's the best compliment I got all day. Often.
No, I feel
Now,
this is the
for me, by
affliction.
the way, with the AI, like I do love this idea that I could actually, as a non-artist, do my graphic novel completely by myself. It was
Yes.
wonderful working with you, Zach. And I've said, like, the main bad thing about finishing open borders is I don't get to work with you anymore. And
Yeah. No, I appreciate
so
it.
just in case people don't love you enough already, you're just human sunshine. You're just like a wonderful, positive person. It's just was all so much fun. And whenever you had a way to improve things, like, yeah, let's do it. Yeah, that's better. Like I suck. You rule. It's like, why did I do that? Oh, because I'm not Zach Weinersmith. But yeah, still the fact that in some imagined future, all by myself, I could go and just say, computer, go and draw this,
Right.
and it would work. That's great. Although so far the technology is so far away from that.
Yeah.
The main thing is you can't get any kind of consistency in character design, which from the
Yeah.
point of view of a sequential art means that it's almost worthless.
It's almost worthless. Yeah. 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 I mean, I thought about this, like, because before this all became controversial, I was sort of playing around with it. I think you could probably, if they were comfortable getting in trouble, you could probably speed up an artist a lot. Like, so for example, as I was looking at the pages your artist drew, I thought it occurred to me that I could have, like, if I had to do it, I wonder if I'd be tempted to say, like, Dolly 3, generate a cityscape and I'll trace it and I'll fix the,
Mhm.
AI artifacts and that sort of thing. But I guess my feeling is like, you're
Yes,
absolutely right
especially
about
if you can say do it in
consistency.
the style of Zach Wienersmith.
I mean, that's an interesting question too, because it's like, so my understanding is there is law saying like if you impersonated like Morgan Freeman as a narrator and everyone knew what you were trying to do, there'd be a potential liability issue. Like
Mm.
if it could potentially be
Mhm.
confused. So maybe there'd be something there. But like I don't know. I always think you, IP law is
But
weird here
homage
because
is legal. You're allowed to do
right.
something that's very similar to someone else as long as you don't misrepresent it as being done by them.
It's more than that. I mean, when I talk to young artists, like this is specifically what you say is find someone better than you and just steal. Like take
Yeah.
every technique you love, make it yours, take it, because that's what they did. That's what like
Yeah.
you look at like Bill Watterson is like doing Windsor McCay, but everyone's forgotten Windsor McCay, and so it's Bill Watterson. But everybody's this way, and so
Mhm.
like but I guess the flip side of that is it's absolutely right if you extend the logic of artists have always been able to do this, therefore nothing bad is happening. Then the question is that like is that going to produce the best art like if you separate these things like if like you could just say reproduce this art, and it's divorced from the artist. I don't know. I worry that like limits the number of people who get good at their craft. But I guess I don't know. Well, I guess we'll all find it. But as you say, it's not useful yet. I thought it would be, but it's not. But maybe 10 years.
It is, disappointing, but like, I mean, the main thing with AI is that there were like 30 years of blank checks and hot air, and then suddenly
Yes,
it started
yes,
working. And that's,
yeah.
it's confusing, definitely, because I'm a big, the future will resemble the past kind of guy. And then it's like, oh,
Yeah.
wait, the future stopped resembling the past. Like, oh, no.
I don't know about you. The first real encounter I had with it was GPT 3.5, and I was like literally in a daze for like a week. Like it was the weirdest experience of my life. Because I mean, it was like it's not just that AI wasn't there. Like chatbots were like always like the worst, most pathetic AI. They were always like it was like Eliza, you know.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
was just it could barely do anything. Then all of a sudden it could more or less. I mean,
Mhm.
you eventually figure out its limits, and it's surprisingly not as useful as you would think for productivity, but it's
Mhm.
still like it still feels like magic. Yeah.
All right, last question. What's next for Zach Weinersmith and the
Oh,
Weinersmith team?
oh man, well, lots of cool stuff going on over here. I like a fool. Even as I was wrapping up my last book, I was signing a contract for another one. Beowulf. It's a 700 line unrhymed verse epic for children, and surprisingly, it sold very well. And so I'm working on a sequel. I'm actually hoping to turn in a draft at the end of the month, and it is just, I've never had more excruciating work in my life. I mean, I'm happy with it, but it's like writing poetry on a deadline is like
Yeah, sounds tough.
vicious. It is really tough. I feel like the
But
differences
so,
with
but so
like,
you're so my
yeah,
impression was that you were very closely parodying specific lines from Beowulf. That's not true.
no, 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 no. Well, I mean, this could be a vast, terribly boring tangent, but I will just say like it is much more like an adaptation, but also just if you've read Beowulf recently, like lots of it just simply will not track. Parts of it don't make sense. Parts of it are weird. Parts of it just don't work in the setting. So actually, especially with the second book, a lot had to be changed. But
Mm,
also, I'm in terms of like literally borrowing lines. There's almost nothing.
mm.
One or two places I've stolen like a kind of classic Old Norse or Old Icelandic or Old English turn of phrase. Like you could refer to a fight as the Clash of Shields, you know.
Mhm.
But generally speaking, I try to make up my own stuff. So no, it's
Mm.
much more torturous. I wish it were a straight parody. That would be. I actually am working on a straight parody of Beowulf, like as a pleasure project, which is much easier. Um, and then, you know what? I'd have to say it off the record because I have another thing I just signed a deal for, but more kids books of a very different
So
type.
actually, this is being recorded. So if you say it, it'll be on the record.
Let me keep it for afterward. For
Okay.
the
All right. All right.
yeah,
Fair enough. So something secret's going to be told that the viewers will not get to know, but rest assured, one day shall be exposed under the light of the sun. All right. Well, it's been
yes,
awesome talking to you, Zach. My new book
always a
is Build
pleasure.
Baby Build, and I got a dream, Zach. One day we'll collaborate again, and
Oh, let me.
maybe actually what I really need is for the AI to destroy all your other opportunities, and then you will come crawling back to me.
It's a beautiful vision of the
Yes.
future there. But,
All
but
right.
yes, congratulations on your book. It's a wonderful book, and I hope everyone buys and then enacts the changes demanded.
All right. Thanks a lot, buddy. Talk to you later, man.
Talk to you later.